I'm super happy that we have so many people who are interested in the topic, equine metabolic syndrome, and how we can help our horses recover. Um, I'll just wait a few more minutes because I see that people are still coming in. And then, yeah. Hello from Smithers, BC. I'm also from BC, so hi, Patricia. Karen from Alberta,
Hi,
Scotland.
Karen. And Lydia, I recognize Lydia too.
Kathy from the US, Lauren from Ontario, Suzanne. Lydia from Ontario, West Coast of Canada. Andrea, hi Andrea, I know Andrea, hi. Mary from the Sunshine Coast. Ingrid, Cheryl. Hi, everybody. Well, let's dive into it. Today, this is the first interview I'm doing. I thought let's do something new, and I really wanted to invite Alicia Edwards. She's a natural animal healthcare consultant, educator, and a long-term animal lover. She loves horses just as much as we love horses. And I met Alicia on a seminar in 2016 where she talked about supporting the horse and helping them recover from metabolic diseases like equine metabolic syndrome, EMS. I immediately liked her because she knows so much about healing horses and she's very science-based. And on top of that, she's so knowledgeable, and I could tell that she is speaking from experience. She has helped hundreds of horses help recover from equine metabolic diseases. And my own horse, Kira, was diagnosed with EMS in 2016, and she had a serious laminitis attack. It was so serious that I couldn't even see how lame she was because she was so sore, that because both of her feet were so sore. It was hard, it was overwhelming, and I felt very, very guilty about letting my horse get sick. But I did found valuable resources, and one of those resources is Alicia, and it really helped so much to hear when she said that there are ways to help our horses recover from EMS. I'm just getting emotional just talking about that. I had a whole journey in 2016 because the vet said, no more treats. I'm a clicker trainer, positive reinforcement, so I do train with food. I was stubborn and I worked my way around it to find ways to help Kira, who didn't want to move because she was in pain and overweight and lethargic and depressed. She didn't want to move, but I found ways to help her move with positive reinforcement and enjoy it. That was a big thing, and in that time, I really deep dive in about nutrition and supplements to help horses recover from EMS. I forgot most of it because I don't need to use that every day. So therefore, I invited Alicia Edwards from Healing Horses Their Way to talk about this, because I think it is super important to let people know that you can do so much. That really, really helped me. Today, I will be talking with her about her expertise helping horses with EMS. Alicia also offers an online program resolving equine metabolic syndrome naturally. We will talk about that later. And we also have some bonuses, so stay tuned to the end. Alicia, welcome.
Thank
So
you, Sandra. Love being here. It's not often I get invited to be the interviewee, so this will be good. I just have to
awesome.
ask questions, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and how you started to help horse owners of equine metabolic syndrome? horses?
Yeah, so for those of you that know me, there's quite a few people in here that I recognize, um, know that my mom got started first. She was a homeopath clinical nutritionist. Then she started working a lot with horses. She was a homeopath clinical nutritionist for humans first, then moved into horses. And I was about 10 when we got our first horse. So on the other hand, my dad was a pharmacist. So I had a lot of healthcare in my household, right? Both healthcare providers, but from very different parts of medicine, one more traditional and one more holistic. And so I kind of got really exposed to different ways of approaching health issues very early on, and what the options are. You know, for humans, it's actually not too much different, actually, between, horses and humans as far as, bigger picture stuff. And so that was just part of my DNA from very early on. So
It's
then
so
when I got
beautiful
older,
to hear that you could marry like those
yeah,
traditional and holistic approaches, because then you are, yeah, the person that has the best of both worlds to start with.
yeah. Yeah, and healthcare isn't easy. It's not easy for us. It's not easy for our horses. There's a lot of decisions to be made for horse owners. And so if you don't have the information, education, you're not empowered to make those decisions. And it leads to a lot of guilt and shame. And did I do the right thing? And self-doubt and all of those emotions that don't feel very good. So I'm always trying to empower horse owners. I don't want to tell you what to do, but just know, like, just keep learning, because you never know when you're going to need that information. And I try not to get too left or right sided with the approach, because it depends on what's right for you and what's right for that horse in that moment. And as soon as we start slamming doors to other things and other options, it's very limiting. It's limiting for us, it's limiting to our horses, and we get in our own way a lot of the time. So just holding space for that right solution. And the more we know about horses, the better you're able to make those decisions. But when I started to get older, I was just very inquisitive about what the right thing was. Like, I think I remember thinking when I was younger, like, how can this be? Why is there such opposition? If it's a natural law, it has to be true everywhere in all areas of healthcare. So why do we have such a holistic paradigm over here that's always in opposition to science? It didn't make sense to me. I don't know if it makes sense to a lot of you either, because a lot of us don't want to jump for medication. We want to try and resolve it as naturally as we can, so it's easy on us, easy on our horses. So I kind of started out in science. I went and got my degree in organic chemistry. I learned a lot about the biochemistry, took a lot of anatomy, physiology, that sort of thing. And then I ended up working in the pharmaceutical industry for several years, and then full circle came back to the holistic world with horses. So it was quite a turnaround. But through that, I got a lot of experience, and I was able to develop a lot of my thoughts and beliefs around my experience. So I think that really just gives me a more well-rounded approach. It's not you have to do this naturally. It's not you have to use medication. It's what's best for this situation. It's different for
And
every
how
horse.
can you do a little bit of both, maybe,
Hmm.
to help, yeah, the horse in your situation? Like, yeah, Kira, when she got laminitis, I got anti-inflammatory medication and painkillers, and I was super grateful for that. So yeah, that's I learned more and more, but it was also overwhelming. Yeah, so I remember
Yeah.
that how good it
Hmm.
was to find somebody who like was a real person, and not like just a website, or I don't know, yeah, a
Yeah. And,
business or something. I found you.
in science, it's very black and white. That's sort of the structure that has humans created. It's either right or wrong. It's either proven or not proven. Whereas when we take a more holistic approach, there's all shades of gray. Like there's just, for those of us that follow the energetic field, which creates our physical health and our emotional health and mental health, we know that it's not that easy. It's not just yes or no or black or white. So we have to take those holistic principles and use them for traditional medicine too. You know, what might be right or wrong for the situation, instead of putting generalizations on a lot of the horses. And if there's one thing I've learned over all these years, so I started working with horses full time in 2010 or 11. So I'm in 12 years of working with lots and lots of horses. And so we really want to, you know, keep in mind that every horse is different and every horse responds differently, which means there's going to be variations in the approach that you take.
Yeah, I
Sure.
totally agree. Can you tell us a little bit about what is EMS, Equine Metabolic
Mhm.
Syndrome, and why has it such became it such a concern for horse owners?
Yeah, so I got started working with EMS, and it has been a little bit of a focus of mine in through my education platforms as well, because it's an epidemic. And so, we used to go to a lot of those trade shows, and we would have booths, and you'd talk to 500 people over a course of a couple days, and it's such a high percentage. My horse is laminitic. My horse just got diagnosed with insulin resistance. My horse is Cushing's, or they didn't have a diagnosis, but these are all the symptoms. And so I started going, oh my gosh, like there's so many metabolic horses out there. It really is an epidemic, and horse owners are struggling all over the world, not just here in Western Canada, all over the world with the insulin resistance, Cushing's, and PSSM, and laminitis is a byproduct of that. So when we talk about the metabolic umbrella or equine metabolic syndrome, there's really three conditions that I put under there. And it might be different depending on what resources you're looking at. But insulin resistance for sure, because it's all about the metabolism of sugar. So insulin resistance really affects the pancreas. Those horses will typically have high insulin levels when they're diagnosed. So not always though, but you can kind of see where the symptom picture is going. And a lot of those horses end up with laminitis, which is inflammation of the lamina in the feet. And so that is the biggest concern, because if your horse can't move or walk, you're in a little bit of a situation there. So, and sometimes, as you know, it can be so acute that you don't have time to practice prevention in that moment, right? We need a solution. So that's the first condition. And
Yeah.
then there's the Cushing's, which has been recently termed PPID, is the short term for that, or pituitary pars intermedia dysfunction is the long name that they put on it, PPID. I just go with Cushing's because it's just what people know and understand. And that condition really affects ACTH levels. It affects the pituitary. So, and the pituitary produces ACTH, which then signals the adrenals to produce cortisol. And then that hormonal cascade can cause, muscle wasting, hair coat changes, slow shedding, excessive sweating, and a lot of those hormone related things. But sugar affects it too, right? Sugar and stress can really have a big impact on the development of Cushing's syndrome and prevention, or an obstacle to get them recovered. So that's the two most common ones that I see. And sometimes you'll have a combination. Sometimes you'll get horses that are a little bit IR. You can see it in the symptom picture. And now they're shedding out slower. They might have some generalized inflammation, muscle wasting, that sort of thing. So there can be a mixture in there. So that's the other thing with traditional medicine. We like to really box things up nicely in a package and say, that's where my horse is. In the real world, there's shades of gray, right? It might be a little bit of IR, but it was enough to trigger imbalances in the
I
ACT.
think that is part of why they call it a syndrome, because they
Yeah,
call it a syndrome if it has like many symptoms that sometimes can be very vague, and then they call it a syndrome, and then it's like put it underneath that
yeah,
umbrella.
right,
But
exactly.
I remember like the first time that I heard about insulin resistance, and they called it in the Netherlands, I lived there, they called it like, this horse is allergic to grass. Well, in fact,
Yeah,
it couldn't handle the sugars in grass, but I
right.
was like, that is ridiculous. They are meant to eat grass. How can they be
Yeah,
allergic to their own natural food?
yeah.
But when
Yeah.
you learn how those processes, biological processes in the body work, and how the environment works, because in the Netherlands we have a lot of grass fields meant high protein for milking cows. So
Yeah, yeah, and so that is a pretty general statement, but you do have to be cautious with sugar, with all metabolic conditions, because it can definitely send them down this cascade. And back to your earlier question, why horses are struggling so much with this, it is not natural to their genetic makeup or blueprint to not move and eat high sugar feed for hours on end. And the domestic lifestyle very much puts them in those situations a lot of the time, because we don't have the space, we don't have food options for them, and sometimes we don't know the information, we haven't analyzed the hay, we don't know about pasture, and then they're not getting a lot of exercise. So that is already setting them up for issues with metabolic syndrome and a sluggish metabolism. And then you do have at-risk breeds as well, where their ancestry has been designed to move long distances, work really hard with very little food. And then we put them in a situation where in a candy store where they're not moving. And so their genes already are saying, well, I guess we better do something here, like put on more weight. And the sugar itself causes a lot of inflammation. And so the body has to do something. It has to adjust to try and get a balance somewhere. So that's where a lot of those symptoms come from. Yeah. The third condition I should talk about before I skip over this one. So we've got the IR, the insulin resistance, we've got the Cushing's. There's also the PSSM. There's another term for it, but I usually refer to it as PSSM, and that's polysaccharide storage myopathy. That one's a little bit different. It's still a metabolic disorder, but it happens more in the muscles. So that's the sugar metabolism in the muscles. So that can cause a lot of trembling, muscle tightness. It can be actually quite painful for horses because the sugar conversion just isn't happening very efficiently. And it can be genetic as well. So there's the PSSM 1 and 2. They're finding a ton of different variants out there. And I often get asked, but I have this variant, so how do I address this? And my answer is always, when we're doing the holistic approach, I don't care what variant it is, because that doesn't really change our approach. These issues are, let's say, I can't say, like, if you get a horse where it's already in their genes, they have a genetic predisposition, and you put them in an environment that's going to allow those genes to express themselves, then we have to change the environment, because there's nothing too much we can do. We can't go back in time and re-engineer their genes. So we have to find a way to keep those genes switched off or not activated, and that is the best way to approach those more genetic issues. And some PSSM horses, it's not genetic, it's just the environment that they're in has created some metabolic disorders in the muscle.
So tell me, is there hope for horses with equine metabolic syndrome?
Yeah, and I think there's some people in here right now, because I recognize them, that have had a lot of success with both IR, laminitis, Cushing's. I've had success with PSSM as well. And my approach is 100% holistic. So I can't give advice on medication. I don't give advice on medication. And so my approach is really, okay, so if all these conditions, and now they've become chronic in a lot of cases, are caused by diet and lifestyle, that's where we start, right? We know what causes these conditions. So let's just start there, with drugs and surgery being the last resort. And that's just my personal approach to my healthcare, my animals' healthcare. Like, let's see what we can do by addressing underlying causes first. And as you know, it can be amazing what can happen.
I think that's such a good approach, because sometimes, like in the modern world, we are so taught to just give them some medication and deal with it, but the medication usually is to help them with the symptoms of a disease, instead of really helping solve the issue. Like,
Correct. Yes.
and with a holistic approach, you can influence the genes switching on or off, like what you said already. Like if we put them in an environment where they have not enough exercise and have too much sugar, well, you can have already two things that you can work about and influence about, where you can influence those genes. If you don't do that and just put medication on top of that, yeah, you can give them anti-inflammation or painkillers, but you don't really heal them or help them recover or yeah, keep it under control. And that's what I like about that holistic approach. The only thing with a holistic approach is that it asks a lot of the owner, and owners need to
Mhm.
be prepared to make changes. And I think that's another thing that can make it really hard, because maybe you have to make changes in the management, so in the nutrition, in the exercise, in other environmental things. So maybe if you board your horse, you have to move your horse, or maybe you have to adjust the environment if you have them at home. And that's, I think, the part where the owner needs to get involved.
Yeah, and I will say though, because yes, you can, it depends on the horse, because I have seen some horses which I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to take a lot of commitment. We got to make a lot of changes here, but the owner can't quite do it, whether they don't have the resources to set up whatever it
Mhm.
is at that moment. You have to make some changes. You have to start somewhere. So I say, let's just change these two things, right? They're manageable for the owner. And sometimes I'm shocked at the results that they've been able to get just from the little things. So if you're listening and you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is way too overwhelming, and I have my life and my family and my career, don't let that deter you. And to say, okay, I can't do this. I guess there's no hope for my horse because I can't. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes it's not as much work as we think. But if you
Can
have
you
a,
give one example of where somebody changed a little bit that you thought, oh, well, there needs to
yeah,
be more
so
changes, and what results did you get out of that? Just to give us like, oh, yeah, maybe
yeah,
that applies to me. You never know.
yeah. So a couple of examples, a hay change. That's it. Don't even bother with the mash. Let's just start with a hay change. Just start with just sending your sample in to get a hay analysis done. Let's just see where the sugar's coming from first. Let's just assess that. And often when we think we can't, there's always a way. You just have to put maybe a little bit more effort in at the beginning and then make that shift. And sometimes hay change isn't an option. I run into that too. They say, I can't take my horse off the round bill. He's boarded, it's the dead of winter, can't do it. Okay, let's just start with some better nutrition then, because you can use a lot of nutritional strategies to regulate blood sugar so that they feel more satisfied, so they're not gorging all the time on the round bale. You're also clearing a lot of toxicity out of the body. You're providing nutrition that helps metabolism and thyroid function, pituitary function. And I have seen horses just turn right around, just getting 1 bucket a day, 1 bucket every 2 days, because just with that added nutrition. So it doesn't have to be this monstrous, let's build a track system, find some of this like somewhere new to live, drill a new
Walk
well.
them
Like, yeah,
3 hours a day.
yeah. So don't let that throw you off if you feel like there's nothing else you can do management wise. And sometimes owners feel pretty overwhelmed with getting them moving too.
Yeah.
I can't move my horse. And I'm sure you have a lot to speak to on this too. There's lots of ways you can get your horse moving around without killing yourself. You don't have to be in the saddle either necessarily,
Yeah.
but they have to move a lot of times. And so this one horse that I'm thinking of that we did it on a round bell, she lost a ton of weight. She's in some of my webinars, and I've talked about her lots. And she, all the inflammation went down. She started moving more on her own, going down hills, trotting back up, because she started feeling better. So what people don't often realize is when your horse is standing there all day and not moving and all they're doing is eating, they are probably not feeling too good. right? They're not feeling their best. And when you start seeing horses on their own, being self-motivated to go play with herd mates and run on their own, like it brings us tears of joy sometimes. I know some of the people listening know exactly what I mean when you see your horse run for that first time and they haven't moved in forever. So those are just some of the signs of a horse that's feeling better. And then they self-exercise. So that's two birds with one stone.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And what you
Yeah.
say about the hay, I mean, is like totally true. That's one of the first things that I did, and I made some changes. In my case, it was 2016, so maybe there's updates about this approach, but I start soaking the hay to flush it out because it was a little bit over, well, 12%. I think it needs to be around 10. Am I correct?
So we aim for around, then there's lots of different advice and information on
Yeah.
where sugar levels can be. And in my experience, I look at, I don't know, over 100 analyses per year from all over the world. You can't always be picky about what you get, and there's
No.
very few hays that are perfect with their numbers.
Yeah.
Like there's a handful out of all the analyses that I look at in a year. And then those ones that are in perfect range, I think, okay, this is great. You've got a good hay. There's a lot we can do. And the horse doesn't respond well. So just because your numbers are perfect doesn't mean that hay is going to be great for that horse. So just always keep that in mind. And especially for those of you that are working through laminitis or having frequent episodes of laminitis, and you look at your hay analysis and you think, well, it can't be the hay because it's in range and the sugars are low. And what else can I do? Change the hay anyways, even if it's a little higher in sugar, because I've just seen horses just come out of it just with a change in the hay. There's something about that they're having inflammatory reactions to. And sometimes it might even be pesticides, chemicals, we don't know. You know, and of course, we don't always get that choice. So make sure that's the first thing I usually tell people to do, you know, especially if you've tried the soaking and it hasn't worked either.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So what do you specifically want horse owners to know about equine metabolic syndrome?
There can be lots that you can do, you know, and I think, you know, just from the number of horses and horse owners that I work with over the year, you know, one of the top things I hear people say is, I've just tried everything. Nothing has worked. My horse is still sore. Hormones aren't changing. Blood work's not changing. Well, there's a reason. There's a reason. So just because you're not aware of it, don't know it, don't give up, because there is a reason why your horse isn't responding. And there's a lot of different things that play into that. Nutritional deficiencies, level of toxicity. There can be just other factors. Stress is another one. And that toxicity includes feed toxicity, chemical toxicity, medication toxicity. All of that can affect metabolism too, because it ties up the metabolic rate, and kind of, especially medications, right? It's trying to find a different pathway around because something's been blocked or inhibited. So we all have to keep that in mind. The body has to compensate for that. And nutritional deficiencies are rampant with horses, and they require a lot of different nutrients to support their metabolism, their digestion, their inflammatory processes, their immune system. And so just with soil quality, the amount of chemicals that we're putting into them, all of that chews up nutrients. They require a lot of nutrients, and stress can chew up nutrients too.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we have to be mindful of all of that and say, but yeah, I'm giving my horse a balanced mineral mix. I've done everything I can do. My horse isn't changing. Well, balanced mineral mixes aren't the answer either, because they often don't get what they're supposed to get out of them. There's too much competition between minerals. If the horse's digestion is very poor and struggling, they're not going to be able to absorb enough out of there to really correct a problem. So it's really good to kind of learn a little bit about certain nutrients and what you can do to help support the horse, specifically that horse. Yeah.
I'm super happy that there's hope, because
Yeah.
that is the reason why I invited you, and to share that message, because it can be so overwhelming if your horse has, like, especially because it is a syndrome. They have like so many things that they can suffer from, and vets don't
Yeah.
always know the answer. And usually you call the vet once or twice, but you don't speak to your vet on a daily basis. So like, what else can I do? And yeah, pick their brain. And
Yeah.
so it's really good to know for all of you that there are resources out there, people that you can talk to that have the time and are specialized in this. So that is super.
Yeah, and one challenge for horse owners and for me too about certain things, not necessarily this, but when you're searching for something on Google, you find a lot of information and a lot of conflicting information.
Oh
And
yeah.
then you go and ask 3 different practitioners, and they're going to have different information for you. So if you don't have experience sort of guiding horses through this, or even the people you ask haven't had a lot of experience guiding people or horses through this, you're going to be just left confused. So a lot of this is about finding the right help that's working for you and your horse. And also, when you find all that information, it's chaos out there on the internet, as you all know. And so you can put in one search word and come up with 10 different things, let's say about alfalfa or the way you should feed it, or about beet pulp and how bad it is or how great it is. And you're left going, well, I guess it's bad. I guess it's high in
Use
sugar.
beet pulp to gain weight. Use beet
Yeah.
pulp to lose weight. I'm like, what?
Yeah. And I am telling you that it's not all correct. Not all those resources are correct. A lot of it is based on misinformation that just gets carried forward. And
Copied and copied and
yeah,
copied some more, and yeah.
and furthermore, some of that information can be correct, but in different situations.
Yeah.
Like if you have a horse that's eating twice as much hay as they should be, and then you go give them 6 cups of beet pulp, they're going to probably gain more weight, right? But you cannot generalize that statement and put it on every single horse. Not every horse responds the same. Some horses do great on alfalfa, some horses do not. So you got to watch those generalized, don't use this every horse, because that's just not the truth. Every horse
Well,
is.
that's one of the advice that I got from the vet that I really took to heart. He said, your horse has equine metabolic syndrome. She's foundered. Don't go on the internet. So,
Yeah.
and I found that valuable advice, because what would have happened, I was already overwhelmed. And then it would get me more and more depressed about what I found and all the conflicting information. So what I did, I was lucky to have my husband. He has background in biology, so and in medicine, so he knows how to interpret the scientific studies. So he was the one finding the studies about, like, how long do you soak hay, what else can you do, all those questions that I had, and he was my buffer. So if you have somebody who can do the research for you and help you interpret the meaning of all, and I think you can help people with that too. That really helped, because he was on the internet for hours and hours, and I was at my horse hours and hours, and it was super,
Yeah.
super stressful. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to sift through a lot of stuff, and I read a lot of papers. I read a lot of research because I just want to see what's happening out there. But it's not, I don't hang my hat on those papers either.
No.
And I'm sure your husband just was watching all this, but how well designed is the study? Where did those horses live? How old were those horses? Were they mares? Were they geldings? And a lot
And
of,
how big was the sample? Because sometimes
yeah,
we study
right.
about 5 horses.
Yeah, and I guarantee in a lot of those studies, if you're looking at approach, it's not going to be true for every single one of them, right? We're looking for statistically significant results often in
Yes.
those scientific papers. So, but what we do as lay people is we read it and go, well, I guess that's a no, or I guess that's a yes. When a lot of those horses in the study, it might have been no a little bit, might have been yes for a lot of other horses, right? So
Yeah.
just what I do, I read those papers to get more information in my mind, to open up new possibilities. Like, okay, I never thought about it that way. Like maybe this is something I should pay attention to. But I never will take that study and say this is true for every single
No.
horse.
No,
Yeah,
that's what we
yeah,
did. Like he did a whole study about soaking hay. some said warm water, some said cold water is better. They were
Yes, right.
all those studies were conflicting in itself,
Yeah.
but then it was like, okay, you can use cold water, lukewarm water, warm water, and now I have to look at my situation. Well, it was August in southern BC, so the weather was like 20, 25 degrees. If I would let it soak, then you can get like all kinds of that it can ferment.
Yeah.
Ferment.
Yeah.
If it stays too long wet and all those kind of things. So I draw my own conclusions. Like I'm not gonna
Mhm.
let it sit too long because then
Right.
I
Yes.
create like other problem. But I agree on that absolutely. Like um, look at it as information
Yeah.
and expand your knowledge and yeah,
Yeah, for
what
sure.
is
And
true for your situation and
mhm,
ask for help. I think that's a
yeah,
really big one. Ask other people.
yeah. And the biggest thing that I would like people to know is if it's not working, try something else,
Yes,
right? Even though everything you've read said it should work, don't just think, okay, well, I guess this is it, because it doesn't work for every single horse. So just because it's not working, it just means that you haven't got it yet. That's all. You haven't
exactly.
really figured it out yet. Yeah.
So, do you put horses on the same program for insulin resistance as that you would for PPID? And where
Yeah,
do you
that's a
start if they
Yeah, I
have
could
those?
talk for a long time about that. But what I will say is, and for those of you that have been through my metabolic course or planning on it, it's a bit of a roadmap for you, so I can help kind of, because this is a really big conversation. But the first thing I get you to do in that course is, where is my horse in the spectrum? And I call it a spectrum, and I know other people disagree with that, but I've seen enough horses go from IR to PPID that I know that there's often those horses with a mixture of both. And so where do you start, right? Do we start with hormones or do we start over here? Well, if it progressed from a more IR symptom picture to a PPID, meaning you started with fat pads and a crusted neck and fatigue and inflammation and maybe a laminitic episode or two, and now they're shedding out slower. Maybe you even have some muscle wasting now around the top line or something like that. So the symptom picture has evolved. Then you have to start at the beginning. That's the underlying cause that got your horse over here in the first place. So often those situations, all I'm doing is trying to remove the triggers. So removing all the obstacles like feed toxicity, chemical toxicity, supporting digestion, strengthening all of that, because if their digestion isn't functioning very well and they are not metabolizing sugars very well and they're already insulin resistant, you are already triggering hormones over here that are now exacerbating the PPID, right? It'll change the ACTH and cortisol levels. So I will always start at the beginning where the underlying cause is. That being said, I talk a lot about layers in my course, and especially in my big course, where we have to start with what we see today, not 10 years ago or not 20 years ago, because if we try to tackle too much all at the same time, we are going to confuse ourselves, we're going to confuse our horse, and sometimes they just don't respond as well. I want you to be able to see progress, and I want your horse to be able to respond quickly to the changes that you are making. So the very beginning, it's what does your symptom picture look like right now? And then the next part is, and what are the underlying causes,
And if you
right?
talk
So,
about your big course, is that what's that called?
sorry?
You say I touch base on that in my big course.
Yeah,
What's that
so
course called?
the big course I do is Healing Horses Their Way. Registration opens for that in January 2023. And there's a few people in here today that have been through that course, and that we have to start somewhere. So we start with, where is your horse at? If they are so laminitic that they can't move, that's where we start. We need to
Yeah.
get that inflammation down right now. So I don't care about the PPID in that moment. right? Because I know the PPID is just a side effect of everything else that's going on. So we have to start with what's causing all the inflammation, what's breaking down the feet. Then we can kind of see, and for those of you that have followed this, you see how your horse starts to change and the layers start to peel off. And then the next thing might be, okay, now we need to regulate hormones, right? Because there
Absolutely.
could be other things going on there, including stress levels.
And let's talk a little bit about diet and how we can use their diet to help prevent and recover horses with
Yeah, so of course, the first thing, if you have a metabolic horse or laminated horse, you know this, we're watching sugar. That's the biggest thing. Horses are just like us. Sugar is a poison to many of us. It is to our horses too in high quantities. There is such a thing as feed toxicity, and sugar is a toxin in my book when we're looking at metabolic syndrome. So we have to reduce sugar levels. And if your horse is that sensitive to sugar, then nothing you do with multis and single nutrients and supplements is going to mitigate that. That's an important point to make. So we have to start with diet first. That's number one. That includes making sure they've got a reasonable hay. If you can't do anything about your hay right this second, don't worry. But just look at everything else, like pasture. How much time are they spending on pasture? So that's the first thing with diet that I look at. The second thing is I like to include a mash often in their programs that has higher fiber things, maybe a little bit of protein, depending on what their hay looks like and what their previous diets have been like, maybe a little bit of healthy fats. And I use those not for calories, but I use them to regulate blood sugar. And they can be very effective when you use them properly. And there's different ways you can mix and match, but the most important thing for horses is fiber. So if you take away one thing about what you're going to change in your diet tomorrow, it's look for high fiber foods, not high fat, not high protein, not high sugar, but you're looking for high fiber. Horses have billions and billions and billions of bacteria in their hindgut that ferments all of that fiber. That's where they get about 70% of their energy as well. So that's super important. The microbiome in the hindgut helps with nutrients and immunity. Immunity is a really big one. It helps with inflammation. So you really want to make sure all these horses have healthy guts, because if they're not fermenting properly, or their diets or previous diets have contributed to a very unhealthy microbiome or environment, you might be spinning your wheels a little bit until you kind of get that restored.
So what should we know about those supplements? Or supplementation, I have to say. Is that what you talk about when you talk about the meshes?
Yeah, so I'm talking about certain food items. So it depends on the horse, and I don't want to give you specific programs because everybody listening is going to have probably something different going on. But a higher fiber thing, as we talked about, would be beet pulp. But if your horse doesn't tolerate it, they don't tolerate it. If they do, but a lot of horses do pretty well on it, and you're not using it for calories. So watch your quantities, and it's a pectin, so it's high fiber, and it can really, really help regulate blood sugar. So that would be an example of a high fiber feed that I'm looking at. I stay away from all the commercial feeds as well with metabolic horses because I'm trying to reduce all of the non-essential ingredients and potential preservatives and chemicals and things like that. I don't want their digestive system working any harder than it has to. And I also, you might have a metabolic horse with ulcers too on top of it. So then that's going to kind of mess things up a little bit for us. It's going to complicate things. So that's all the more reason to make sure to go easy on the guts when you're first starting.
That's one of the things that I used for Kira, the beet pulp, because of the fiber. Back in 2016, I could only find beet pulp pellets that you have to soak. And
Yeah.
I wanted just the loose shredded beet pulp. You
Yeah.
get that now because what you say, I agree with that you want the food just natural as possible and not like do another whatever they do in the plant with those to make it into pellets. Usually they use molasses for that.
Yeah.
I've understood, and I have talked to producers of those pellets, and they don't give you numbers.
Yeah. So you also have to watch ingredient lists because it's not mandatory, it's not regulated, horse feed. So, the more information or education you have on what you're feeding your horse, the better, because then you learn, But with beet pulp, the glycemic index isn't that high. They use a little bit of molasses in it to formulate the pellet. You watch the beet pulp that has added molasses because sometimes they'll add extra. We don't want the extra. And even with the little bit of molasses they use to formulate it, because there's so much fiber, and we know this for humans, it definitely applies to horses too. Fiber helps bring down the glycemic index. It helps regulate blood sugar. So even with a little bit of molasses, it's not going to change the GI as much just because of the high fiber content. So that's just something to keep in mind too. So when we are using a little bit of beet pulp, and not a lot, right? We're not using this for calories, and your hay is maybe a little bit higher on the scale. I have seen this lots where the beet pulp actually helps regulate blood sugar. They'll start feeding a little bit of beet pulp and they will stop being so hungry and food possessive and aggressive. They won't be gorging all the time. Like I've seen that behavior change enough times that I know that that's helping just bring down the glycemic index from the hay.
Yeah,
So you can
I've
use these things
experienced
for your
that too.
strategy. Yes.
As soon as you add enough fiber, like when Kira had was diagnosed with laminitis, I put her separate from the herd, and she got all these behavioral
Mhm.
issues like chewing wood. Well, that's number one indication that she needs fiber, and she
Mhm.
was bored, and there were more things, and adding the beet pulp, but also
Yeah.
adding other sources of fiber
Yep.
absolutely really, really made a huge difference in behavior and how she felt. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and so that's another sort of point. So if you're looking up some of these things, and it's not just beet pulp, there's other sources of fiber that you can use for horses. Rice brine's another one, but be careful with its use. And they're looking at is the rice brine and think, well, no, I can't add rice brine because it's really calorie dense and it's going to add weight to my horse. But they're not looking at the rest of the big picture, that maybe a little bit of higher fat can help slow down the GI. Maybe we aren't using it for calories. We're just using it because to help bring down the sugar levels, to help repair some of the insulin resistance that's happening, to help restore digestion too. So, and maybe that horse has been just deficient in a lot of fat soluble nutrients. So for those of you listening, just be cautious on the information you're getting, and just remember there's a whole bunch going on there. It's not just about, don't get too tunnel visioned on one opinion.
awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And in your experience, what has made the biggest difference, or what has led to the most improvement with metabolic horses?
Yeah, so that's another loaded question, but I do have some simple answers for it. So
Keep it
with
simple.
okay.
If they
So
want
there's
complicated and
yeah,
in depth, they can go to your course.
yeah.
So yeah.
So there's thousands and thousands and thousands of horses with metabolic syndrome out there. You have horses with IR, horses with PPID, you have horses with PSSM, you have horses with a combination of IR and PPID. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. And I believe those numbers are a little bit higher because not every horse has a diagnosis either, right? So the numbers we read are only ones that have been actually diagnosed. And I've seen lots of horses that present with all of those things that we've talked about, but the blood tests come back normal. So just keep that in mind too. I think it's actually a lot higher than it is. And what I have learned is every horse is going to be different in what they respond to. What the horse owner is capable or able to do just to start. So we've talked about that is going to be different. Every situation is different. But if you could do one thing for your horse, it is move, move, move. Do not let them stand there at the round, but when they're moving, they are not eating. So that's the great thing, right? It doesn't have to be super complicated either. And I'm sure you have a lot to talk about there too with your training methods. But
Absolutely.
movement and exercise is required for detoxification, gut motility, getting peristalsis, getting the digestive system working, making their digestion efficient, their metabolic rate, reducing inflammation, neurotransmitters in the brain. All of those things cannot take place without movement, and horses are designed to move long distances, and that's why some of our at-risk breeds are struggling so hard. So our little ponies, or Shetland ponies and Welsh ponies and Canadians, big metabolic piece there, quarter horses. I work with a lot of quarter horses, Arabians, Morians. All of those breeds are really at risk, they're predisposed. So you've got to get them moving. Like, and it doesn't have to be running them to death, like 15 minutes of just fast walking or trotting around you on a line, even 4
That's
times a week.
absolutely the same thing that I recommend if
Yeah,
people come in my course, positive reinforcement movement training for overweight horses, is like start where your horse is at. That's very important. And just
yeah,
walking 15 to 20 minutes in one pace does so much more than irregular like movement and lunging them one day and then not doing something the next
yeah.
day. But also, yeah, I agree with you what you said earlier, like start where your horse is at. And if your horse
Mhm.
starts at 15-minute walk and not even in one pace, that's where you start. And what you said, because that was also the conclusion that I draw back in 2016, like the vet recommended lunge or whatever movement, um, and stop feeding treats. Well, you can't tell a clicker trainer that because then you're all confused. But
Yeah.
so I found my ways. But like when they move, they do not eat. So that was one of the things that I thought, you know
Mhm.
what? And then she's occupied, and if I can make that movement and that exercise a little bit more pleasant for her by using positive reinforcement, that's how I discovered that it's totally doable. And it's yeah, and start where your horse is at. That's the
Yeah.
number one thing.
Yeah.
Don't think that you have to start lunging for half an hour
No.
every day, or when you never lunge your horse for whatever reason. And just start
Just
small.
start, right? Just start with
Start, yeah.
little things, and just implementing as many strategies as you can to encourage movement. And that's just one of the lifestyle things that we all struggle with as horse owners, with the amount of land we have, our setups, because we can't send them off into the mountains, for the winter. Some of the healthiest horses that I've seen, I'm out in Alberta, just north of Calgary, and some of the healthiest horses are ones that go out onto a quarter section, and literally the owners don't see them till spring, right? There's no blankets, no shoes, there's nothing else. They might towards the end throw out maybe some round bale or throw out some hay regularly, but they pop, because then they are back in the kind of the natural cycle of things, right? Where they lean out over the winter time and then they come back into spring. And that's just sort of how it goes. So yeah, and they just come back great. And then you can supplement them with a little bit of extra, right? Just because we like to do that. Lots of plant-based stuff, and yeah, and they like, what? My horse has never been sore in 25 years. But he's out on a quarter, right? And they're moving, right? They're moving and pawing and working for their food. And sometimes, with the challenge we have, is we just make it too easy, because that's just the lifestyle that we have, right? So they're just out with their heads in a round bale all day, every day.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what Kira did. And when I had to change boarding facilities, but then I found something in the Lower Mainland with group housing on a dry lot. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And that really, really helped. And I did more things, but yeah, it really helps. And for Kira's situation, winter helped because I didn't blanket
Yes.
her. So yeah, she
Mhm.
just lost weight just because of the cold. And it isn't that cold
Mhm.
in the Lower Mainland, British Columbia, Canada. So, but it still, yeah, helped. So that
Yeah,
was
and they
always. easy
They
for me.
use a lot of energy to keep warm. And the other thing too is in the wintertime, especially if you're in the lusher, you have kind of lush springs, right? Where the grass starts coming out, you have more control often in the wintertime. So I tell people, don't wait till spring, start now, get them more metabolically efficient now, because you can control how much hay they're eating. You can control what they're getting for nutrients, especially if you're bringing them in and, they're close to you. Whereas if you wait till spring and then people are like, the grass is coming and I don't have anywhere else to put them, and now they're on grass and they've just spent all winter with their heads in a round bowl, literally, and now they've gained weight over the winter, and now you have a very high risk situation for an episode, right? A laminitic episode in the spring. So start now, start in the winter time.
Yeah, I was just about to say that it's October,
Yeah.
so this is just, yeah,
Yep.
you're
It's
all here
perfect
in a
timing.
good time.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm talking a lot about that for that reason, because you can do a lot of preventing. You can do a lot with prevention for sure. Because often these horses, their chemistry is out of alignment or out of balance long before we realize it. And I think some of you can probably attest to that. You just didn't see it coming. And then all of a sudden, boom, right? Laminitic episode shows up on the blood work when you've been doing regular blood work. But I guarantee that has been building for a long time. And so the average age of PPID, especially, or Cushing's, is 14 to 16 years old. But it didn't just happen at 14. Like, they didn't just turn 14 and boom, that's it. It has been a work in progress for a long time. So don't wait.
That's the hardest part. That was like
Mhm.
what was so hard for me, because when the vet came, Kiro just turned 8, and he told me like
Oh,
insulin resistance shows between 8 and 10. And she
mm,
was always chubby, but like with an Andalusian dad and an Exmoor pony mom, I told myself, like, this is her breed, this is how she's built, always a crusty neck, always. Like, since she
yeah,
was 1, she already
yeah,
had that a little bit. But then I started to implement like exercising, but I didn't know how and how long. I didn't know that. And then I dropped that because I went on vacation and she was healthy. So
yeah,
not that need that I had to push through with that. When she got that diagnosis, I was so motivated to
yeah,
make those changes, and then she never got laminitis
yeah,
again.
yeah,
But because I didn't have like, it was okay, right? But
yeah,
when I learned, like, usually it shows between 8 and 10, and she just, the month before she turned 8, and in August she got insulin resistant, I'm like, ouch.
yeah,
But
and
it was
yeah,
building, and it
and
was,
it's a lot to take in
oh yeah,
when you're just not sure where to turn. But I can promise you, you can turn IR horses around. If you put them in the same environment again and they're predisposed,
oh
then
yeah.
yep, you're going to end up right back in the situation again. But there's a lot you can do for IR, and it's not much different than us and being pre-diabetic or having blood sugar issues yourself. So it's just about diet. And don't forget about nutrition. I didn't touch on nutrition very much, like single nutrients, but that can be a big piece to the puzzle too. And for those of you that want to take my webinar, they'll post it up here for you, the link. I talk a lot more in detail about nutritional therapy and different nutrients you can use as well.
Would you like to share the link, Georgie, to go to Alicia's webinar about 4 steps to resolving equine metabolic syndrome naturally? So that is super cool.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so for everybody who's here and their horses have not yet been diagnosed with one of these syndromes or diseases, I would say don't wait, because there's a lot of things that you can do now, and you don't really want to wait until they got really sick, and you have to do it.
Mm,
And you can start like what Alicia already said. Like, maybe you can just change one thing in this moment and already help turn certain genes off. Um,
mhm. Yeah, and sometimes it doesn't have to be as complicated as we think it is. Like, and I know how we can get so overwhelmed, right? We're already worried, and then we have more tasks to do in our day and all of those things. And sometimes it seems impossible. But if one thing, I know one thing for sure is horses are just so incredibly resilient. You know, like they just, things are a way bigger deal to us than it is for them, I guarantee you. But it doesn't always have to be complicated. It's one thing at a time, right? And for some of these horses that have, been or had a diagnosis or had a lot of pathology going on for a long, long, long time, and now they're between 25 and 30, they're going to be more challenging, just to let you know, right? And another thing to keep in mind is don't expect a turnaround in 24 hours when they've had this, spiraling for so many years. Give them a minute. And that we talk about a lot as well in my courses. We actually talk about it all the time. Suzanne, Gerlanda, Lydia, I see you, all three of you there. We talk about this a lot. It's different for every horse. And for those of you that have taken a holistic approach and tried to practice a lot of these principles that I'm talking about, it's fascinating to watch how each horse responds, how long it takes them. Some horses in our group, they bounce back so fast, we just can't believe it. And other horses, take a little bit of time, and they're often the horses that have been struggling the longest. And sometimes it's just because we didn't know.
I have a question from somebody said the link takes me to a page to sign up for the free webinar that is happening now. Is there another link?
There should be some different time options there, because it's just constantly, I just have times set up throughout the day. So you just have to choose a later time. There should be 3 different options there for you to choose.
Maybe Georgie can share the link to your website as well, because I know you have a freebie for EMS horses.
Yeah, I think it's on there, isn't it? You found it there too. So yeah, you can go to my website as well.
Yeah, Georgie has shared the link. Thank you, Georgie. Awesome. So, do we have some time for questions? Thank you so
you
much,
bet.
Alicia, for your time and
Yes, you're welcome.
answering all my questions.
Yeah, we can talk forever.
I know.
Our group often does. I'm like, yep, we'll just have a group call for an hour, and it's 2.5 hours later. There's just so much to talk about.
I hear you. Shall we see if there's some questions in the chat, or Georgie?
Yeah,
Have you seen
so
some questions?
I see one from Lynn here. So what are some of the nutritional supplements or additions we can provide with a change of hay to low sugar hay? So one of them is the beet pulp, not for all horses, but some horses do pretty darn good on that. So you can just start there. There's some other things, like I talk about a lot of different things inside my EMS course, and what my recommendation would be different depending on the horse and what they're working through and all that stuff, and the history a little bit too, but that would be just a great start. There's also some single nutrients, so single vitamins, single minerals, essential fatty acids that can all play a pretty big part in the metabolic processes and helping horses with IR and PPID and things like that. And that also is going to be different depending on your horse, because lots of horses, just every horse has a different nutritional profile. And I talk about those in detail in the EMS course, how to identify deficiencies, how to use them for therapeutic benefit. But for one, I'll give you one example, is selenium is a big one that comes up a lot for metabolic syndrome, just because of its role with the thyroid and the metabolic processes, and also because it's one of the most common deficiencies. Lots of soils are depleted in selenium, and the form matters. So watch your forms of nutrients. You want a bioavailable form. So for selenium, you're looking for selenomethionine or organic selenium. Reva's Remedies carries that as well. So you can start there. And essential fatty acids are good too. And you can get those from crushed flax. You can get them from chia seeds. So there's a lot of different natural sources that can support metabolism and hormones too.
I see another question from Andrea. She's looking into hay testing, and there's a few options of what things you want to get it tested for. What are the most
Mm.
important things to have tested? My horses don't have metabolic issues, but I'm curious. Anyway.
Yeah, so I don't get too much into the nutrient balancing. You can find nutritionists at feed companies, probably at your local feed store, that can do that for you, because a lot of people make their mineral mixes to top up what their hay profile looks like. So you might find that it's the best to get all of that done, right? To figure out what's all in your hay, including iron, like just to have that information. So you can talk to the lab about that and what your options are there. But when I'm looking for the macronutrients, just to see what sugar levels are, I like to see the non-structural carbohydrates, the water-soluble carbohydrates, the ethanol-soluble carbohydrates. So they show up as NSC, WSC, ESC. And I also am looking at protein levels, true protein levels. So there was another question up here that said, I'm opting for low sugar, but higher than necessary protein. So that's a very good point. When you're doing these hay analysis, there's always a trade-off where, you know, hay that's high in sugar is going to be lower in protein, and hay that's lower in sugar, higher in protein, and horses low protein, higher sugar, right? Like there's the macronutrients have to make up somewhere. So yes, if your horse is very sugar sensitive, just start with higher protein to start if that's all you've got. Let's just see how they do on that first. And that's just, and sometimes I'll tell people mix the hay. If you've got like a higher protein over here and a lower protein over here, just try mixing and see if that'll work for you. But yeah, that's definitely something to pay attention to.
Kathleen says, would you consider a baseline genetic test to help alert you to whether your horse might be predisposed to certain pathologies?
Yeah, I'm assuming you're talking about PSSM, because usually when people are looking for a diagnosis for IR or PPID, they're looking at insulin levels, sometimes sugar, but mostly it's insulin levels that the vets look at. And they're also looking for ACTH levels on the blood work. And I don't always have blood work. Not every owner does blood work, but they know there's something off with their horse. They have the symptom picture, and I don't need blood work to tell me what's going to happen. So we just start, right? It doesn't really matter, but a lot of people like to do the blood work. So we have a starting point and they like to monitor that, and that's great too. But just always be mindful that there are natural fluctuations, especially with the ACTH. So you know, it's not a perfect world out there with those tests. A lot of people get their diagnosis for PSSM and they come and say, we've got a diagnosis. And again, you know, if the symptom picture is there, but not in the blood work, it doesn't really matter, because in the holistic approach, we're just addressing the whole picture, right? We're addressing what those underlying imbalances are. And so we just start addressing a lot of that and changing the environment. But if it's there and you know it, then it's all the more reason to get on it and start practicing prevention, because now it's clinical. It's in front of you, it's showing up in the blood. So that's just motivation to get to it.
Linda has a question about beet pulp. I was wondering how much soaked beet pulp per day for the fiber, not for the calories. Sorry if you mentioned that and I missed it. Thank you.
Yeah, so what I would do is do 1 cup soaked. Not a lot. It's not a lot at all. And some people struggle with that because they're used to feeding such high quantities sometimes. And then they're like, 1 cup, like he's going to starve to death, but he won't starve to death if he's got access to hay. And it actually will often make them less hungry. If you have a very large horse, upwards of 1,500 pounds or something like that, like one of the drafts Percheron type horses, then you can increase that a little bit to two cups after soaking, not before. It has to be soaked, and I'm talking about after soaking. And then just start with that and see how it goes. Yeah, they don't need a lot. It's actually quite amazing how little they need to change. Like it always
they developed like on really low nutritious, high fiber grasses with almost nothing in it. And if you see what we feed them now and how we keep them, it's like it's amazing how much horses are still healthy.
I know. Yeah. And you know, I know this too, that once you get them going really well, like you've done all the work and you've committed for a period of time, their threshold often will change, which means their
Yes.
tolerance will go up. And one of the biggest questions I get is, will my horse ever be able to eat grass again? It's going to depend on the horse. If you have a little pony that's just going to be starved for sugar all the time, they're going to take every opportunity they can. You got to watch them, the little guys. And some of them will have always a sugar sensitivity, but many horses, like they have to have some happy moments in their life too. And if we deprive them too much and we go too hard with our expectations and what we're doing, it's kind of like someone telling us when we love sugar, you are never going to touch sugar as long as you live. There will be no more dessert. There will be no more candy. There will be no more treats for you. They love treats, right? And horses that are kind of wired to love sugar, they also love sugar. So we can offer that in balance at some point, but sometimes at the beginning, it's just a hard no for a while. But after time and they become more metabolically efficient and you get them moving and you start building up their muscle a little bit, they can tolerate a little bit. Give them the 15 minutes on grass.
And it
As long
depends
as
on what
it's,
kind of grass, if it's
yeah,
overgrazed with lots of sugar in it, or it's longer grass and the temperatures and whatnot. But yeah,
yeah, and
it's
yeah, and
absolutely
use it as
not
a
a
treat.
death sentence.
Yeah, for sure. Use it as a treat, and then the horses really appreciate you too.
Galanda says, taking Alicia's online EMS course and later the VIP course changed my horse's life for the better. I learned so much and I am still learning. Alicia has so much knowledge. Furthermore, I got to know so many great people taking these courses. Well, thank you
Oh yeah,
very much.
thanks, Rolanda, for that comment, because we really, all of us holistic women just stick together. We have really, we do some great things in all the courses and just taking a real natural approach, and we're all on a quest to learn more and do better for our horses. So I love every single one that has taken these courses.
Tammy says, our pony suffered for years. Last winter, I was hoping I could get him till his past shrink to lay him at rest at home when the ground isn't frozen. I don't really understand what I'm reading. I found Alicia's online course and reached out. Jack is now running and bucking and healed from Cushing's. I'm forever grateful to Alicia and the course Healing Horses Their Way and the VIP course. Oh,
Yeah, so
spring, not
Tammy,
spring. Oh, yeah, I get it.
Tammy,
Sorry.
Tammy had started the Healing Horses Their Way last February, and she was really, really struggling with her pony Jack, and he had severe laminitis, like really, really sore. So she was, you know, almost ready to pull the plug and say, okay, I think it's time to let him go, because you cannot keep horses like that for that long. And she's just saying that the ground was frozen. So her plan was to wait till spring. And we just got him started on some very simple things. We got him off the medication, and it was just like amazing. He just started running and moving, and those ponies can sometimes be challenging too because they're little. So
Oh,
it
yeah.
doesn't take much to throw them off kilter. But yeah, Tammy just did such an amazing job. And now she has all of those tools. All those tools she used for Jack, she can apply to all her other horses. Like, she is now empowered. She has experience, she has knowledge, and you just can't go wrong with that. You can apply it for the rest of your life if you've got horses. We all plan on having horses forever. So it just makes sense to know as much as you can.
Afke says there's no selenium in the soil in the Netherlands. My horse is 22 and has lost a lot of top line. I'm stuck with the hay my livery stable provides. In fact, it's very hard to get hay at all in Texas right now.
Are you living in Texas?
Yes, she's living in Texas.
Okay. So yeah, like, it's all different depending on where we are, but some option, which sometimes I'll refer to people, is you can get the compressed hay here that ships very easily. So there's some shippers that will send compressed hay, and they will have an analysis on the hay. That means it's just bound very, very tightly, so it doesn't take up so much space. So you might want to see if you personally can get some compressed hay down there. I don't know if that's an option, but we do have it up here in a pinch. We can phone some of those companies, and they they have delivery there too. But the, point being, if your horse is dropping top line and losing weight and you're not able to get forage, they need forage. That's where you have to start. And if you can't get forage, then you have to go for calories at that point, right? You've got to go find an extruded or some type of somewhat reasonable commercial feed or cubes or something, because they need the fiber, they need the forage. And if they're not getting that, it's, it should only be short term, right? If you're just using short term or short stem forage, that's, 80% of what they eat in a day should be hay or forage.
Lydia says, my little mule appears to be IR, fat pads, crusty neck, and has a mild bout of laminitis in the past. Can I use all this information with my mule? My mini donkey has a bit of weight and a small crusty neck. Can I use this protocol for them? I do realize that donkey and mules need a little bit different, have a little bit different needs from horses.
Yeah, I apply all the same things. I've worked with some donkeys and that are laminitic too. And again, trim is going to be a big deal. Like, you always got to watch the trim, and that's feet. Donkeys have different feet actually than horses, which I find interesting. So finding somebody that works with donkeys and mules too might be beneficial. But yeah, you can apply the same nutrition. Yep, same nutrition, but you have to, depending on their size, you're going to want to reduce that a little bit. I find that donkeys or mules sometimes can be harder. They're easier keepers just because they're definitely built to go long distances and work really hard on very little food. So, and it's hard, you can't just not feed your donkey or your mule. So they can be a little bit more difficult. So movement for this guy too, like move as much as you can get them to move.
Fiona says, do you recommend 1.5% of body weight in soaked hay for weight loss?
Yeah, so watch the soaking long term, because you're also soaking a lot of nutrition out of your hay. So that's something often people don't realize, because it's just all out in the internet, just soak, because it helps reduce the sugar. But you want to be careful about that too, because you might be inducing nutrient deficiencies of water soluble nutrients. So I like to start at 2%. That's just me. Especially if it's a horse that's been eating a lot more than they should be. Like, I don't want to starve them right off the bat. And the most important thing to me is that they've got food in front of them most of the time, not gorging, but that they aren't going long periods without food. That is going to be more important to digestion and stress than anything else you can do. So if it's 1.5%, if that's where they're happy and it's working, then just make sure you're spreading that out throughout the day so that they're not going for long periods without any food.
Galanda said, thanks, it's good to meet a Dutch person who works with horses.
Awesome.
Yes, I do speak Dutch, and there's more Dutch people here on the call, so hi to everybody from the Netherlands.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hi, Lynn. Yeah, it is very empowering to know that there's a lot of different things we can do just with a little bit of knowledge. And I'm sure that just take my webinar, learn more, because I go in more depth on what those steps and mistakes and a lot more detail on why we're doing what we're doing, and you'll learn a lot there too. And if you want to take my course, in the course, I really worked hard at giving you a practical roadmap. And I did that because one of your actual questions that I don't think I got to is, why did you make this EMS course? Like, what led you to do that? And it's because people were trying to grab as much information as they could off the internet and piece it together themselves without really knowing if they were doing the right thing. And then it wouldn't work, and they would start feeling really hopeless and defeated, and nothing is working. And they just didn't know where else to turn, right? They'd already done the research. So what else is there? So I didn't want to just say, here's a whole bunch of information, you guys figure it out. I wanted to say, step 1 is this, formulate your plan for this. Step 2, this is all the information. Here's how to manage this aspect of their diet and lifestyle. So it's A, B, C, D. And by the end of the course, and it's only 4 hours or something of actual talking time, you have a plan on paper in front of you. and then you just go forward. And then you have a Facebook group to give you some support too if you run into challenges or struggles. But many people just get great results just by going through that process, putting your plan together, and just getting started. And I've even done some of the work for you, and you get 4 different sample feed programs in there with quantities and the whole thing. So you can just go pick up the stuff and get started. I was laughing to myself because I buy all my horse stuff at the grocery store. I was going to put up a post about that. I think all of us in our membership in our group do that too. Like, we don't really shop at feed stores anymore. It's all at the grocery store.
Please share. Yeah, I'm curious about that too. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm skipping over all the comments of thank you, awesome, amazing. And the next question is from somebody. My little horses get so stressed. I lock him away from the others to limit grass. I wonder if I'm causing more problems than if he's happy and walking around with the others. He's IR and spring is here. Any guidance here?
Yeah, so we got to watch the stress with horses and for ponies. And I'm wondering if there is a metabolic friend that can stay with him, whether that's another little pony or maybe another easy keeper that you can put with him. It's always better if they can have a friend. That way they're not as stressed. And that's really kind of the only way we can do it. And in some of these cases, they just cannot be on grass. They just can't. And it sounds like this is the situation here too. But if you just kind of get a handle on it in the short term, he might be able to tolerate more later when you get the IR under control. It all depends on the horse for sure.
And what I would like to add to that is because stress is really bad for inflammation. Kira was so stressed out when I had to put her in solitary confinement temporarily to get started. I found really, really clever ways to do a lot of enrichments. So that keep them busy, that make them happy, that they could display all other kind of natural behaviors without getting to just lower their stress levels to recover sooner. But finding a friend, of course, is the best option. And I bet there's things that you can do that are doable for you. So
yeah. And things that help reduce stress, like exercise, and giving them something to kind of do, that always is helpful, just to help reduce stress levels. It kind of just takes their attention away from the threat or the problem. And they're hardwired to be with the herd, so that's just a very common and natural thing for them to feel like that. So the more confident they are, the more you handle them, the more exercise they get, the less stressed they'll be. And that's where Sandra comes in, right? Just giving them better skills, increasing their confidence, using some training methods to help them can go a long ways in just how they handle those types of situations.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I teach people to, help their overweight horses to enjoy movement again, because usually they're not motivated to move because they feel depressed, the lethargic. You as a horse owner don't want to make them move because that hurts and your heart is already hurt. So if you want to hear more about that, contact me.
That's a good point, Sandra. Quickly about the sore horses and movement, they still have to move. And it's the hardest thing for our hearts and our minds sometimes is, oh my gosh, he's in so much pain. How can I make my heart? You have to. They cannot heal without movement. It's part of their natural genetic predisposition to move. And in the wild, they have to move with the herd. It doesn't matter if they hurt themselves, and that's how they heal. The circulation, the nutrient delivery, it helps the inflammation, all of it. But that's going to be different depending on the situation. You don't
and
want
also there's a lot of things that you can do to help them make that easier. I don't have time to go into that right now, but contact me. Georgie can put up my website. Contact me if you struggle with movement for your overweight horses, because there are solutions, and
Mhm.
Like what you say, Alicia, too. It can be one easy thing. Like one thing the vet recommended me that I didn't think of in my overwhelm. In hindsight, it was like, oh, that's obvious. Like because
Yeah.
Kira got like those medication that was anti-inflammatory and a painkiller. I don't know what it's called because it's 7 years ago. Um, but he told me give her the medication first, wait about 30 minutes until the painkiller is fully kicked in before you start moving
Yeah.
her. And
Yeah.
I thought that was such a lovely advice because he was thinking about the horse and he was thinking about me because it was so hard to
Yeah.
a horse that is in so much pain and you
Yeah.
have to do the exercises. So
Yeah,
that's one
and
tip.
often with these horses, the IR I can't remember where I put that example. I think I put it in the EMS course or in the webinar or something, but there was a horse that had not walked comfortably for 20 years. Actually, I have the before and after video on my Facebook page, Alicia Edwards Horse Health, and you can just scroll down and find those videos of Buddy. And the single thing that helped just propel him forward, in addition to everything else we were doing, is he had 3 people push him around in the arena to get him to move. It took 3 humans to literally physically push him forward because he was in so much pain, couldn't walk. So, but that's necessary. You have to get them to move. You have to get them walking. A horse that can't walk isn't going to make it. And that's where they got the biggest improvement. Once that circulation started to happen, the detoxification and all of that. So in the short term, it hurts us more than I think it hurts our horses sometimes. But it is the single biggest important thing to keep in mind with EMS.
Two more questions.
Yeah.
Before we wrap it up, Afka asked, do beet shreds have to be soaked as well?
Yes. Yes, you always have to soak the beet pulp shreds. Shreds have a higher surface area, so they don't expand as much as the pellets do, but you don't want them expanding in the gut. That's not a good situation for horses. So, because it uses up all the water, it actually can dehydrate the gut too and kind of fill it up. So it can cause a colic if you're not careful. So yeah, you want to soak the pellets 4-to-1, water to pellets, and you can probably get away with less for the shreds just because the surface area is greater.
Yeah, I found that a really, really important question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Suzanne asked, what treats do you use, Sandra, that are good for metabolic horses? Well, the vet told me immediately, like, stop treats, blah, 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 blah. But treats in a human way, if we talk about treats, we think about sugar, we think about high value, we think maybe carrots, apple, da, 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 da. When I talk about treats, I rather talk about food reinforcers. So simply I use their food. For Kira, I used a lot of soaked beet pulp as a treat. So there's almost no sugar in there. It was high value for her, especially when she was on a very restricted diet. Um, you could use their normal food and then take that amount that you use in training out of their daily ration.
Ration.
Ration, that's the
Yeah.
word. Ration, to make sure that you don't feed so much in that you undo what you do with exercises by giving them carrots. So I do have a list, a blog written about with 30 foods that you can use in positive reinforcement training for that are things that you might not have thought about. So like what I did is soak beet pulp. I added sometimes cinnamon. Um, Most horses love cinnamon, just to get an extra flavor and some maybe make it a little bit more high value. I never used carrots or apples. Sometimes just hay cubes, but there's different hay cubes. Some are hard, some horses can't chew them, they get really thirsty. because there's not a lot of moisture in there. So there's a lot of things that you can do. If you send me an email, hippologic@gmail.com, then and ask that question or contact me, I will share that blog link with you. Cucumber treats. Yes, some horses love it. Some
Yeah,
don't
and
eat
good
it
idea
at
on
all.
the good idea on the cinnamon too, because it can help with blood sugar as well.
And I
Cinnamon
also
can
used
help that.
turmeric.
Oh
Like
yeah, yeah,
for people, if you smell it, it's not like, oh, nice. But horses love it.
yeah, yeah. That's awesome.
Thank you so much, everybody who has
Yeah,
been here. I will send out an email tomorrow or later today with all the links that we talked about, where you can find the freebie, where you can find the free webinar of Alicia, and also the replay. Yeah, thank you
yeah.
for taking the time out of your day to learn about horses and how you can help them.
Yes, thank you for having me, and thanks for everyone who attended. I hope you take it all forward to just improve the health of your horses, and maybe we'll meet again.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sandra. Bye.
I always say happy horse training.
Yeah.
Bye.